Welcome to Supply Chain Next with your host, Richard Donaldson. Join us as we explore the ongoing evolution of supply chain, from the challenges professionals face every day to the ongoing digital transformation of the entire value network.
And good morning, and welcome to another episode of Supply Chain Next. And I'm thrilled this morning here on Tuesday to have Mr. Scott Downs on. Good morning, Scott. How are you doing?
Morning. Doing great. How about you?
Good. Doing good so far. I think we're better off than some of the folks battling hurricanes and weathering there in Florida. So I'll take my desert dryness in Arizona here.
Right. Yeah,
and
we have some people in the crosshairs for that storm too.
And where are you at, Scott?
I'm in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Right on.
And Invisible is proudly remote and global from the start. So we're everywhere.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, that's a good story there. Well, listen, let's jump right into it, Scott. And kind of like we do, thrilled to have you on here. But let's start a little bit about you. Who's Scott Downs? Who's a little bit of your origin story? How do walk us through a little bit of that path that it looks like sort of in the Southeast there, sort of an Atlanta, Tennessee developer kind of thing going on, and how it got to where you are today.
Yeah, I actually always start candidate interviews when I'm interviewing someone for a job by asking them what their Marvel superhero origin story is.
We're on the same page then already.
Yeah, I feel like there's always something to kind of dig at to find what people's core motivations are. Yeah. So I have my own kind of radioactive spider for myself that led my career in the direction.
And all these are psychological clues that tell us a little bit about which character you choose. You got the radioactive spider versus some gamma ray thing, or so we got a Spider-Man psychology going on here. So
I don't know that I personally identify with that, but I think that you absolutely will see what people value when you look at the narrative behind how they ended up where they are. Yeah. So I grew up in Alabama. I grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. And was a little bit different than the rest of my family. Mm-hmm. And I think that, my family was full of football players and cheerleaders. And I was a kid who skipped grades.
Roll Tide, roll.
Yeah, I'm an Alabama fan. My family is all Auburn fans, just for the record. Right. But yeah, so I grew up in an environment where I was a little bit different, and I was kind of looking for a community and connections to other folks where I would feel more like myself, like I felt like I belonged. So that kind of a sense of community is always something that I valued. And from an early age, I was a math and science nerd. I did a little tour as the kind of backup substitute calculus teacher at my high school when I was 14.
Oh, wow. Jeez.
So like super nerd. Yeah. And somewhere along the line, I decided that I really wanted to have more balance in my interests and in my life. So I went off to college and studied literature. Yeah. So
of course, that totally makes sense, right? We're going right from math and heavy science into literature. Why aren't you a sci-fi writer?
Well, maybe I am. But I think for me that kind of move it foreshadows a lot of things that happen in my life in terms of always wanting to explore the other side, see both sides, explore other areas of interest. So yeah, I went to college, studied literature, was mostly focused on music, tried to make a living as a musician, still am a musician, still am a singer-songwriter. But yeah, I've always had this kind of curiosity and unwillingness to be pinned down to one particular area or be in one box. Mm-hmm. So for me, the story was that for some number of years, 5+ years out of college, I was still kind of strobing through different career possibilities and trying to find ways to meet kind of my imperatives, which were to have a sense of creativity and contributing to the universe in a way that was meaningful for myself. I didn't want just a job job. Mm-hmm. And then the .com era happened, and there were a lot of folks like me who had some knowledge of programming. I'd been programming since I was a young kid, and also had other areas of interest. So it turns out that in the early kind of internet boom, being able to write code and having worked in print design and being able to write and knowing a little bit about managing servers. You kind of put all those pieces together, and all of a sudden you're a hot commodity.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first moment where I felt like I had found my people.
Okay.
Other people who cared about computing, cared about networks,
Mm-hmm.
cared about language, communications. It all kind of came together for me. So that's the start of many things.
Well, let me double click on a couple things, because I think there's an interesting point of view here. So if I'm looking at the dates here, I'm kind of putting you and I at about the same age, roughly graduated, high school somewhere in the late 80s, right? Mid to late 80s, kind of college, early 90s, right? And you started in, if I've got this right here, around 96, 97 in sort of the development kind of thing, but in the Atlanta area, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
Okay. So with that, though, let me ask it, because I just as a contrast, started myself about 97 in Silicon Valley in San Francisco, right? And I kind of fell into investment banking versus development. But similar to you, started playing at the early days of connecting computers when we were moving from 56K modems to DSL. And at that point in time, learning how to connect computers together in a little small business office network meant you understood how to build the entire internet, because the protocols are the same. Like, you learn the fundamentals, right? And they kind of stick with you. But my question is, you were in a different part of the country. You were in the Southeast, which, Silicon Valley kind of dominated at that time. So what was it like to be in what is now an emerging technology hub, kind of being a technologist, finding people, in this coalition in the Southeast, which was, I'm assuming, rare. And I'm contrasting with myself in Silicon Valley at the time, that was the norm, right? Like, everyone was a geek. Everyone was a nerd. We were all talking development and technology. Like, it was, in San Francisco, you could walk down the street and run into anybody and talk about how to hook up computers and what 56K modems were. And they knew what they were talking about. I'm imagining in the Southeast, it was a little bit different in that time frame. Like, what was it like to be there in that? Now looking back on that, what was it like to be there? Because they're very formative. And now Atlanta and the Southeast is becoming a technology hub. You're in Tennessee, that's becoming a technology hub, but it wasn't at the time.
That's right. Yeah, I think I think it all comes back to those kind of core values and interests. I definitely felt like we were on the outside looking in.
Okay.
So my first experience with a software startup, we sold networking software for Windows PCs to work on Apple networks.
Wow.
So I got into that job. It's exactly as you said. I worked for a small publishing company, and at the time, desktop publishing, there was a bit of a promise of like, oh, it's just sort of plug and play. Just go buy a Macintosh, right, and run Quark Express, and you can make a book.
Right.
And you literally could.
Yeah.
But you start to get into it's a microcosm of the growth of the entire tech industry. Like, oh, well, what happens when we want to talk to other computers? So I did the same thing, I think, that you did, which was I started, setting up. I built the first network for a small company, and all of a sudden, I'm a networking expert.
Yeah, right.
And that led me to join a small networking software company, right? So that's how I ended up with that company that did the Windows software for Apple Talk networks. And I was really excited about the whole experience of being able to make an impact on the world as literally measured by boxes sold in CompUSA. Like I wrote the manual.
CompUSA. Wow.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Like shiny discs in boxes that were largely empty. But I could go into a store and I could see my company's software on the shelf. And that was really powerful to me. But that wasn't nearly as powerful as the first time we went to Macworld Expo. And that's when I looked around, and I happened to be there the year that Steve Jobs was still an advisor. He had come back, but you could see he was kind of like weaseling his way in, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Gil Amelio was still the CEO. But yeah, that was actually the first very formative experience for me at the age of I guess I was 24. And all of a sudden I was surrounded by this community that maybe information distribution was different then. Like, I was aware of Silicon Valley through Wired magazine. right? It wasn't the cultural influence hadn't spread quite as far.
Right.
But when you're in it, when you're on the floor at Macworld Expo with the buzz around Steve Jobs' return to Apple, all of a sudden I'm like, okay, this is it. This is the thing I'm going to do now. These are my people. We speak the same language. We have the same interests. And, I actually didn't mind having a little bit of an underdog mentality of being this little software startup in Atlanta trying to create something, which is great to get connected to the nexus.
Yeah, right. Well, but building on that, as you kind of walk through, you could have gone a lot of different directions starting when you started, right? You clearly kind of touched a little bit of development, a little bit of networking. I mean, hell, you could have gotten into infrastructure, data center design, which I'm sure you touched at some point. I mean, there's sort of these foundational elements that grew into what is the internet infrastructure utilities that we see today. But you kind of looks like stuck with a little bit of the creative designing process. I mean, walk through a little bit how you got to where you are today, right? Because obviously you're the CTO of Invisible Technologies. We'll get to that. But at the end of the day, like looking back on that now, if you were kind of helping people in, coming out of school today, undergraduate or graduate, like maybe there was a plan, maybe there wasn't, but it sounds like you kind of fell into a few things. But looking back on that now, how do you reflect on how you kind of progressed to get to where you are now? What did you kind of choose and what was good and bad about it?
Well, I would say that there used to be a job called webmaster.
Right.
And I was kind of born to be a webmaster, somebody who cares about server operating systems, somebody who cares about networks, but also who cares about design, and also who cares about communication, and also who cares about other kind of presentation considerations, UX.
I was just going to say you were doing UX before UX was even a term, potentially. Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And I found that during that, like my progression, I was very happy that the world had fully emerged, that allowed me to touch all these different areas, which allowed me to. My Marvel character may actually not be a hero; it may be a villain. It may be Doc Ock. I'm kind of like a conceptual octopus. I like having tentacles in all these different areas.
Yep.
And what happened over the next kind of 10 years of my career is that I found that the professionalization of web development and web application development and application servers led to this kind of specialization, balkanization of function. Yep. So if you were, there was a time when I would be the guy who I might install Oracle on a Solaris box, and I also might do a design that I share with a client. Now the same people don't tend to do those things.
Right.
And what I found was that as my career was progressing, there was more and more kind of pressure, external pressure to pick something. Like if you're a designer who writes code, people assume you're a bad programmer.
Right.
Programmer who designs, they assume you're a bad designer. So I literally had people in my job say, oh, they knew my design work. So they were like, well, I don't think that you're up for this particular challenge. This is Java. This is an object-oriented programming language. I'm like, my friend,
yeah, right.
I've been writing code since I was 12.
Yeah, right.
This is not new to me. So I guess the progression of my career was that I kind of was riding the same trend that everyone else in the industry was, which was, okay, pick a lane. What do you do? What do you do well? And after doing that for a while and working in consulting roles, I came back to startups because I wanted to be able to use all 8 arms.
Right.
And there's something fundamental about the startup environment that that rewards the kind of many hats thing. And I'm not willing to set aside my hats even now.
Yeah,
I'm just not.
Let me again double click on that, because there's a segmentation where you kind of you're going down the middle of the path in product. I'm going to call it product development, product engineering, and you clearly tacked in the direction of product engineering versus maybe hardcore technology, right? And there is a differentiation between product engineering, and you kind of touched on it, but I want to get into it a little bit, versus product management, which is more the business. I'm going to refrain from putting my words into this one, but from your perspective, what is it about looking back now? Because product engineering led to CTO. And again, think of the context of people listening who are kind of, wondering, what is product engineering? How did you fall into that? Because it also wasn't necessarily a term that was popularized probably till, I'm guessing, I got to remember this, probably the mid 2000s, later 2000s, when we started segmenting, defining the different roles and definitions. Like you were talking about UX before it's UX. You were also talking about product engineering before it's product engineering, and kind of fell into that.
That's right. I think my first product engineering title, and I was insistent on it at the time. Words are powerful, so it meant a lot to me to make sure that it was clear in my role in a particular company at a particular point in time, which was, I think, 2006 or 7.
Right.
I think you can hear a through line in the narrative here that I wanted to make sure that I could be have holistic control over the work that I was trying to create. You want control over the content and timing of your work. And I felt that product management as a discipline was starting to encroach on some areas of engineering where I felt I was expressing myself most fully, right? So I didn't want to have product roles come in and peel away control over the content and timing of the work that I was performing. Now, some engineers find that a comfort. Some engineers find that to be like a way to create certainty and to drill in on problems that truly matter to them. But for me, being the holistic guy with all the different octopus arms, I didn't want any arms removed. So for me, the story has always been, let's create something beautiful and useful that makes an impact in the world. And for me, I just wasn't willing to kind of sacrifice that kind of autonomy, like by totally just kind of casting off any responsibilities for the content of the work that I was producing. And I mean, like, the business impact and understanding how this is kind of an abstract conversation, but the company at the time that I was working with was a startup that had a lot of potential in the mobile marketing space, but we were in the phase of growth where the CTO at that time told me, he's like, "Hey, Scott, like, if we try 20 things and 19 fail, that's okay if one succeeds." So we were kind of churning through different business models and approaches and trying to figure out where we attach to the market. And I didn't want to be out of that game. I didn't want to just be the guy who was trying to build one of the 19 things that ends up getting put in the back closet.
Right.
So that's kind of the context that makes it meaningful to me.
Gotcha.
I want to be in the game.
Gotcha. Well, and I'm going to bring it forward here a little bit, but and I'm going to just get a little. But in your mind, how do you differentiate? This is sort of an open question between product engineering and product management. How do you set the stage for that sort of symbiotic relationship?
I don't know.
Good answer. That's fine. That's fair.
I've built and run product organizations in different companies, and the world moves at such a pace that I don't think it's kind of like what's Heraclitus, you can't step in the same river twice.
Right.
Every time you come back to the question of how to meaningfully construct a product organization or a tech org or a marketing team or a design team, it's highly contingent on the environment and the moment we're in history. So I would say that in 2006, just as an example, when I talked about agile methodologies or Scrum or something along those lines, if you start talking about software development methodologies, those weren't generally relevant to the world. It was something that nerds talked about. And now, like civilians, normal companies and non-tech orgs talk about how they had a stand-up or how they want to be agile. And what I find is that some of the questions that you're describing, like the interesting question to me, actually, as it relates to product, is what is the role of product in a company who's not delivering a pure digital bits and bytes product? If you're delivering Microsoft Word, I think the role of product management is pretty clear. But if you're providing a complex service that's backed by a tech platform, or you're doing consumer tech, the role of the product manager is much, much more interdisciplinary and kind of hellaciously complicated. But it's also where the game is at. It's where the action is.
Well, and I think that's I mean, I appreciate the candor as well too, and I think you're absolutely correct. It is a moving target with a lot of these definitions because even the role of CTO, which you are now, has changed dramatically in the last 20 years, right? On what that means, and it's still, I don't want to say ambiguous, but kind of to your point, it depends on the company, depends on what's going on at that company, and it depends on the timing as to what that CTO is doing. Right. Absolutely. And probably the CTO themselves, right? What do they want to do and how do they want to do it and how do they fit into the management team, how they define the team structure, right? So again, let me swing back. So how kind of, again, walking through, I was kind of walking through the basics of what got you to where you are, but you also have an interesting pathway to kind of lead you to invisible tech, right? Which is kind of, there's development in there. Like you said, you touched a lot of things. You got the 8 tentacles out there touching all sorts of parts of web development, mobile development. But then you get into sort of a process platform. Like, walk through how you ended up where you are now with Invisible, because it's not the most clearest path. There's a general, I think, theme, but, go ahead in your words.
Sure. I mean, I actually... I don't think it's that exotic in that I worked in an enterprise SaaS environment for a decade. And that was pretty kind of bog standard. There was a period of time that we'll tell our kids, there used to be a time when there were lots of software companies and they built software products and you had to know about them. During that period of time, there was just like a massive consolidation. So many of the companies that were our clients and so much of the product that we built ended up in Salesforce universe. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think my story is that I wanted to work for software companies. I wanted to build software for real people that they used. And after a while, it turns out that services and consumer tech became much more relevant. So where are interesting things happening? Is there interesting tech being built at Microsoft still? Certainly. But the rise of the marketplace companies like Uber, really kind of paved a path for how technology could transform non-software industries, how technology infused the work of every modern company, but they kind of were paving a path. So for me, I went from working for an enterprise SaaS company to working in consumer tech for a company that was sort of like the Uber of residential moving, an on-demand moving service for residential moving called Bellhop. It was called Bellhops at the time. They took the S away, but yeah, at Bellhop, the priority was to transform a real world experience, the real world experience of the stress of a move day, and how do we address the problems that are inherent in the complexities and stresses and pain of residential moving? A lot of the issues there relate to problems that can be solved by a combination of interesting business model, interesting technology, and logistical excellence. So one of the problems that's core to I hate to use the word supply to refer to people, but I'm going to. So just forgive me in advance for a second. Right. But a lot of the difference between your experience of a bellhop or a Lyft, as examples, has to do with these being really intimate personal experiences. With moving, as an example, you're bringing people into your home. Right. You've got your kids walking around. You've got strangers whom you've never met interacting with you on your most vulnerable moment, on the most stressful day of your year, maybe of your decade. Yeah. And how do we make that better with technology? Well, that's just a fascinating question. And one of the ways that we do it is that we make sure that we have the right people in place. And it's a significant challenge to be able to scale up a workforce. Moving's very seasonal. Scale up a workforce with thousands or tens of thousands of workers who meet a certain standard, who embody the values of your company, who represent you appropriately, but then rotate off in a few months.
Right.
And you can't do that just with hustle.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just give, if it's okay, I'll give an example of something I think that's like my favorite example of how we execute digital transformation in the context of something like a consumer tech company like Bellhops. There was a period of time where we matched our workforce with moves. And our workforce, by the way, was entirely college students, which was a brilliant innovation by the founders to say, you know what? It turns out that supply and demand line up in a really interesting way when you think about this. Moves are typically executed in the summer and on weekends.
Right.
And guess who's available in the summer and weekends? College students.
Sure.
And guess what? You know, if they can lift 70 pounds over their head, we can give them beer and pizza money. And we can train them well enough to do what we need them to do to deliver an excellent experience. And as opposed to some of the incumbents in that space, we were able to bring in kind of these fresh-faced young kids who had a future CEOs, lawyers, doctors, and they were just really earnest and enthusiastic about their work. But that's not enough, right?
Right.
So that's a great formula to start the thing. That's a great kind of alchemical mixture. But then in terms of executing that at massive scale across dozens or hundreds of markets, how do we assign the right people? How do we hire the right people? How do we train them? And how do we assign them to the right task? And I'm just going to pick one piece, which is assignment. There was a period of time where we kind of took every move. If there was demand, we would accept it, and we would figure out who would go on the move using a combination of a job board. So, okay, there's a little bit of tech, but also we would hustle to find movers for specific jobs. And the percentage of jobs we had to fill through hustle, we called it a Tyson rate. And the concept of a Tyson rate came from the idea that there was a poster on the wall of Mike Tyson. Right. And ultimate startup hustle culture concept, like it's 8 p.m. There's a move in the morning. We need to find some guys who can do a move. Hey, I know a guy at University of Georgia who's on the lacrosse team who might have some buddies. We might be able to recruit him onto the platform. Let's call him up. So there was all this hustle in the operations group to create the outcomes that we desired. But there was no tech enabling that. Right. So we literally measured this concept of a Tyson rate. So the guys would get on calls, find somebody to do the move, and then go like, punch Mike. We Tysoned another one. And it's such an interesting moment for companies that are going through that kind of a transformation to think like the values of that company and our understanding of quality work were driven by the idea that like we had maybe a somewhat insurmountable problem, a ton of kind of chutzpah and energy and enthusiasm, and the way that you solve a problem is through hustle. Well, what we did was we ended up building a system to perform automated assignment based on criteria and previous performance. So we wanted to make sure that the people who'd done well in previous jobs got future jobs, and the people who hadn't done well didn't get any more. So kind of a self-maintaining ecosystem. And we drove the Tyson rate to 0%. And what's fascinating about that to me is not just the technology, because the technology is fairly trivial. And in fact, the technology could drive you right off the cliff.
Sure.
You could absolutely build a Tysoning replacement that put bad people on the job and undermine the entire confidence of people in the brand. But that to me is like just the most exquisite and fascinating example of how you transform a business in the modern era using technology in a domain where you wouldn't necessarily think of this as a problem solved by like a web developer, say.
Sure. But well again, just because there's a lot to unpack in that, and I want it because there's also a beautiful segue into what you're doing now, because you kind of reference some processes and some people. But before we get to that, you did something and you flew over it pretty quick. First of all, you created a KPI, right? You created a way to measure, right, something. And what I want to kind of double click on and kind of shine the light on is there wasn't a KPI known to you all and all of a sudden became the Tyson rate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yet, looking back on that, you did pick something that then allowed you to not only measure it, but then show the improvements or negative effects, right? Because you created a measurement now. And as you said, you were able to drive to zero. So what I want you to unpack a little bit is, number one, looking back on that, did you, now looking at that measurement, like, did you know at the time what you were defining and that it was going to have this kind of outcome? Because it seems like you kind of figured this out after the fact. But these are the lessons people read in books. And sometimes until they live them, they don't realize how powerfully impactful measurement is. Yet defining what to measure up front, boy, that can lead you in great directions or really poor directions. If I'm focused on measuring something that really is adding no value, then the whole KPI discussion kind of goes into, off the cliff. But somehow you're able to latch on something that actually helped the business dramatically. Did you adjust that measure? So I'm kind of getting into the whole concept around how did you create that measurement? How did you even think of that at the beginning? And then, now looking back on that, did you adjust it as you went through to tune it to make the business more successful?
Yeah. So it wasn't my measure initially. I kind of co-opted it, and it wasn't considered a negative metric.
Okay.
So from my perspective, I saw that there was a metric we were tracking that, to me, my intuition suggested that this was an opportunity for technology to disrupt the existing model.
Gotcha.
And my understanding of my function as a CTO in that company or as a technologist in general in the world is to find opportunities to be sort of like a missionary or evangelist for the power of technology in solving problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so often people come to business problems with entrenched values or history. And my whole job is to be a disruptor or to create like meaningful incremental change. Maybe it's not revolutionary, maybe it's evolutionary. But it seemed to me to be clear in that environment, and it often seems to be the case, that when we think about the way that technology is implemented to create success in a company, there will be barriers of inertia, skepticism, just plain old, this isn't how we used to do things, moving the cheese.
Right.
So I understand my job as a technology leader is to tell stories and to create a narrative for success and to create a room, a home for technology to solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
So it was in no way like a surprise to me. When I latched onto that metric, I was like, okay, this is how we're going to show value in a way that this is like narratively useful. Right.
And it clarifies for people who might not speak the language of tech or speak the language of whatever business discipline you're involved in. It's like math. It's sort of a universal language, right? And it cuts across all language barriers and creates clarity, certainty, and direction. But again, the art of creating metrics or data science or that back end, asking the right questions, as trite as it might be to say that, it's really important to understand. It is important to ask the right questions, because if you ask the wrong questions, you're led in totally different and sometimes not great directions.
That's right, and I think you won't be surprised to hear, excuse me, that one of my tentacles is always involved in analytics.
Yeah,
for that reason. I think you're determining the frame for what you consider success and what you consider successful battles in the overall war, the overall kind of journey for your company. And I think the thing that I'm allergic to or have a distaste for is kind of this blinkered or by the numbers thinking of like, well, these are the metrics, right? This is what we think about.
Right.
And what I find, and I think like one of the benefits of age, I'll say, is like I've seen enough different environments and seen how radically different brilliant people can approach even similar sorts of problems.
Yeah, right.
That I think we all need to just kind of loosen our limbs and think about like what is the real problem here? What are we really trying to solve? And too much of sometimes analytics work can be rote. It can be like, well, we measure this. This is what
Mhm.
we always. I measured that in my last 3 companies, and we will measure this. I'm like, yeah, but guy, like this, this is
Right.
not.
Oh,
It's not what matters this time.
right. Right. Well, I go back to I go back to all the way to the beginning. And if it didn't portend your philosophical approach to life, which is we live in a constant state of change. That's about
Mm.
the only thing that is certain, right? Is things change. And that gray area, most people are not very comfortable in, right? They want certainty, they want clarity, almost in sacrificing, I'll call it, because it's a subjective term, truth or facts, right? Certainty is a warm blanket that people are willing to wrap themselves up in lieu of the world burning around them, right? And like, well, I'm being a bit extreme, but
Yeah.
because similar to you, like whenever I hear someone say, this is how we've always done it, like literally the hairs in the back of my neck stand up. And I'm like, okay, there's opportunity here. Like, you know what I mean? Like, let's look at that. Why do you say that? Can we improve that? Because that's the same thing that people, scribes said when they saw the printing press show up. They're like, oh my God, well, the printing press, how are you supposed to do that? Like, we've always written in books and blah, 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 blah. So it is the antithesis of innovation is this sort of status quo, things don't change, keep myself wrapped up in certainty, right? Because the future is uncertain. It just by definition it is.
Well, I guess it's sort of a corollary of necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to create new things, then put yourself in a space where there are problems that require creativity.
Sure.
And like for those of us who choose to work in startups, I mean, I could go work in a cushier, safer job that's more certain, and maybe I should. Right? But
depends on your life. Depends where you're at. Depends on what's going on in your life.
It's just my particular dysfunction is that I enjoy the messy spaces.
Yeah. Well, let's bring it into then kind of invisible tech, because again, a lot of consumer oriented things. And you kind of whimsically touched it. So I saw the handoff of the baton that you were doing and creating that bind to what you're doing now.
Yeah.
But process is a lot different than what you were doing back at Bellhops, right? I mean, there's still platforms, and I'm going to come back to platforms in a second. But what is invisible tech? How'd you get involved? And specifically, like, just go into that. Yeah.
So yeah, I think. I was setting up the story, which is that I spent a decade in enterprise SaaS. Hey, actually, can we pause for a second so I can get my dog to stop?
Yeah, sure. Of course. And as far as, the continuation, but now talking about invisible tech, kind of where you're at, how did, and process. I mean, talk a little bit, describe what you're doing now, because it seems to be different, but I see the platform kind of progression here.
Yeah, I mean, I spent 10 years working for an enterprise SaaS company, building a platform that enabled automations, largely focused on mobile marketing use cases, but we built process flows and flow charts for multi-channel marketing campaigns. So, we get an SMS message, and then we send an email, and we do this other thing. And that was a platform that was used by, and still is, I think, in some form, by a lot of major companies in the U.S., Comcast, American Express, JCPenney. And my experience in that space was that we were building a really exciting and powerful tool that enabled us to be, our clients to be process-driven, largely in service of enterprise marketing initiatives. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was great. Like, I love the technology. I love that space. But at the same time, I kind of yearned for some kind of broader relevance of the work that I was doing, something my mother could understand.
Yeah, right.
Mom, this is what I do.
Right.
Okay, I don't really know what you're talking about. So then I worked for this marketplace company, CTO for Bellhops, and was trying to bring a revolution to the experience of the consumer residential move. Mm-hmm. Relax, it's move day, right? Mm-hmm. Like everything doesn't have to be stressful. We'll take care of all the details, and the tech enables it from behind the scenes. Right. Well, what's interesting about Invisible to me, and the reason why it just felt like the right thing, I've been with Invisible for 3.5 years, is that it's a combination of an automation platform that we've built out, and also a marketplace for workforce management. So that's the behind the scenes view. So I should at least explain what the product is and what we.
Right.
So when you look around, here's my kind of view on the nature of modern work. You drive down Main Street or Wall Street or Sixth Avenue, and you're going to drive past all these buildings, and you see all these buildings have little offices in them, and each of the offices there's 5 different departments, and each one of the sales teams is trying to get data into Salesforce, and the marketing team is working with HubSpot.
Right.
And the finance team is working with QuickBooks, or maybe they're in NetSuite. They're all using the same tools, and we're all facing some of the same problems. And the space of kind of general purpose knowledge work, things that go on in offices, is shockingly similar.
Right.
With little variations, but shockingly similar from box to box. And you're driving down the street full of all these little boxes full of human beings performing tasks. And in some ways, I think one of the most painful aspects of like the progress of technology is the place where we make humans act more like machines.
Right.
So when you think about the experience of, say, I just spent some time with some folks in insurance companies last week, and some of our clients, and you'll hear a story about someone who works in an office in Florida and is very familiar with the Florida insurance regulations related to this specific problem space. And everything has to go through her. And her job is basically like to execute a series of conditional logic. Like you could easily imagine a lot of the decision making that she has to do is based on like understanding of a context, some state data, and then what actions you perform in each of those situations. And you can hear when you talk to people, and sometimes in these sorts of roles, sometimes they find it enjoyable in the same way that I might find it enjoyable to do daily crosswords.
Right.
But you also feel like this dehumanizing thing of like, there's an infinite amount of work. Technology doesn't solve the problems. It just creates more platforms I need to learn. And there's no way to scale this beyond the heroic efforts of a small number of individuals. So where Invisible comes in is that our good fit client is a rapidly growing company that needs help. Like how do we scale up our business? Like if you're not growing rapidly, you probably can handle it, with internal hiring. And you're probably a company that's thought, hey, should we outsource some piece of this work? Should we hire, 500 people in the Philippines to man a call center? Or should we have claims processing running out of some other offshore type of group? Like, how would we approach that? Or maybe I would just broadly characterize those as outsourcing and BPO type of solutions. Then there are RPA sort of solutions and automation solutions. Let's hire some engineers. Maybe let's build some solutions with tools like UiPath. They're going to be expensive. They're going to take a while to get going. But they're going to be great. If everything goes well, it's going to be like amazingly efficient.
Right.
But you also have to take on the risk of embarking on a complex tech project. So Invisible's value prop is to come into these kind of situations where there's very horizontal. There's a lot of different types of problems fit this description, but rapidly growing company, scaling problem space, need some help, want to take away some of the complexity. That's what we're here for. So instead of coming to that fork in the road and having to decide, like, am I going to invest in managing outsourced resources? Am I going to invest in complex tech implementations? We just say, look, we're going to deliver the results for you. We can scale up a team really quickly. We can have solutions for you in the first week. We can be delivering things in the first week. And we're going to be able to do that through a combination of we manage a workforce for you to your needs. And we also layer in automation where appropriate. And when we find opportunities, we bring that on board. And a couple of little nuances to that make us a little bit different from or more than simply like a smart outsourcing model. It's interesting, we were talking about analytics. Our KPIs are our clients' KPIs.
Okay.
We are paid based on results, not based on hours. So there's inherently often a problem with taking an outsourcing approach of like, it's kind of a contractor problem. Like if you've ever had somebody to build your deck, there's really no incentive for them to do it any faster.
Right.
In fact, if anything, there's an incentive for them to maybe drag their feet, unless you're paying a fixed price. If you say like, okay, it's $10,000 to replace my deck, then you'll be in a hurry to finish it, and we'll be talking about quality. We'll be having the right conversation. But if I'm paying you based on $500 an hour or $500 a day, just come on out, then you're just going to hang out.
Yeah, of course.
So by having aligned incentives for what good looks like, quality KPIs, and having a results-based pricing model, what we end up with is we're all aligned against the problem, same problems.
Right.
So if we see that there are opportunities for automation, it's not going to be performative. Like we're going to deliver automations because it lowers our costs. It makes it possible for us to lower our pricing. It's in everybody's best interest. And the reality of that world where everybody's living in their little boxes in their different buildings is that we've built up and we continue to build up expertise in a variety of areas that allow us to create efficiencies that other people don't have. They don't see into all those other little rooms. So our CEO, Francis Pedraza, he refers to this in a really ambitious, visionary kind of way as mapping the corporate genome. We're not there. We haven't fully mapped the corporate process genome and understand what every little team does in every department. But what we've done is we've built a process management and process execution platform to enable that. So what does that mean? In a lot of cases, when people talk about being process-oriented, what they mean is they've documented a set of processes. Maybe they've got some SOPs. Maybe they've got some flowcharts and some maps, some guidance for like a visual understanding of what's going on. What we're doing is bringing all of those things into our platform. So when we execute a process for one of our clients, you can see it. You can see the canvas. We've built it out. There's no question of compliance. Like, do the manual steps get executed as expected? Well, actually, as it turns out, every person who's executing a manual step in a process gets guided through a custom-built UI that we built from within our platform. I feel like I'm going on a bit.
No. No, it's perfect because you got me thinking a couple things. One is immediately, I think the 800-pound gorilla in the space is ServiceNow, right? So you're kind of drafting on them a little bit, right? But ServiceNow, oh God, I'll be controversial here, and I actually know a bunch of whatever. But is that even ServiceNow? It's a little bit going down the SAP road for me, right? I'll be controversial. This is Richard Donaldson's opinion. SAP to me is, again, can't take away from how big and installed they are, but they are as far as I treat them as the Walking Dead, right? Meaning they will extinguish over time here because that install base will replace them, and it's like it's every other technology company that sort of lives on that install base, and I feel like ServiceNow is. Even though they don't realize it, they're kind of their toes dipped into that La Brea tar pit, already. And even look at that. I don't know the guy at all, but the guy who came from SAP to run it, after John Donahoe, my ex-CEO from eBay, was there. Where I'm going though is, so one, you sound a lot like ServiceNow, but then secondarily, from a technology perspective, and this is what I actually want to ask is, you also are building something that has to, it's focused on bigger businesses, right? Not just SMBs, but now you're in the enterprise space, right? And your processes, I don't care how great they are, but they still need to interoperate with a bunch of other technologies, right? Now, this is opening this can because I feel like this is the trend that we're going to see for the next 5 to 8 years. Whether CTOs and CIOs understand this or not, it's a separate question. One, they're going to build all their technology things onto platforms. That's just a given, right? SaaS is, Salesforce said it. Benioff said it back in the day. Software's dead, right? That is 23 years later. We're just now starting to realize that. Secondly, if you are now running an enterprise, you're running everything on SaaS cloud-based platforms, the other key element is those platforms have to interoperate with each other. And you have to start thinking about a data model that allows you to do that. And then you have to start thinking architecturally, what are my key elements? What are my golden masters? What are the key data pieces I need to kind of focus on, kind of build from there? So the question is, how do you, to me, that's still, I mean, you and I might go, well, shit, that's what we've been thinking about for 15 years. But when you go out to the world today, this is still what I just described to you is a radically newish, innovative concept, platform of platforms, right? The enterprise is all on these things. You got to interoperate, think about data exchange to get the full value for the enterprise, right? Because if you're just one isolated piece of enterprise software, well, yeah, you're gonna get you're stuck. That's not going to maintain itself. So how do you view that today, both in the context of what you're doing, is the guiding principle around what Invisible is doing, but also speak to it in a larger sense, speak to the CIOs and CTOs out there at enterprises. It's like, hey, you got to start thinking about not only what am I selecting for what its purpose is, but how does it interwork with everything else I need to sew up to make the enterprise ERP 2.0 come to life?
Yeah, absolutely. I see it very similarly.
Yeah.
I think like one of the metaphors that I use is it's kind of like if you took an Arctic core sample, like if you take a core of, you're going to find all these different layers going on. And when you think about any meaningful process that a company might be performing, there's a complex web of third-party software tools, humans with individual expertise, tribal knowledge, institutional knowledge that has been documented and managed. It's just chaos. It's just super messy,
right?
Inevitably. And it's not messy because people are stupid or awful. It's messy because the world is messy, and problems are complex. So a couple of principles that have guided the development of what we've built and what we continue to build that kind of reflect on that. One, again, kind of an anecdote. Having built a process management platform in the past in the space of mobile marketing, I was really proud of this thing. And I remember we would go on these quarterly business reviews and meet with clients. And I think it was IBM. It was one of our bigger customers. I'm meeting with them, and I asked them about this thing that we called the multi-step editor, which was a complex process management flow where you could drag in pieces and create complex workflows. And I asked them how they felt about it. They said, "Oh man, it's fantastic. It's like the best thing ever. It's awesome." Like, cool, that's fantastic. I'm really glad to hear that. How often do you use it? Oh, never. It's way too complicated. Like, I've got a job to do.
Right.
I can't be an expert in your crazy software.
Right.
And I think one of the principles that guides what we do is an understanding that we don't charge for consultation. We don't have consultant. We're the anti-consultants.
Got it.
We come in and say, okay, you know what? Let's sit down together and we'll help to map out this process together. Maybe you already have some documentation. Maybe you've built some things. We're going to build this for you. So we don't expect that. We're not going to put a high barrier of entry. So we don't believe fundamentally in this idea, like as you're referencing, that like you throw a software tool out in the world and people will come and explore it and learn it. It's just that day has passed.
Right.
It passed when people stopped buying largely empty boxes with shiny discs in them at CompUSA. So we're past that. So fundamental principle for us is that we come to where you are. We don't expect you to come to us and add yet another software product to your stack.
Right.
So that's one of the principles. Interoperability is another key principle. So when we think about like what makes our platform valuable, it largely is driven by having a strong strategic library of integrations and automations.
Yeah.
So I could show you a logo slide. Here's the 50 or 75 different third-party software products that we integrate with.
Right, but let me touch on that real quick because I don't want to gloss over it, because this is where I also think people get a little bit lost in the term integration, right? Let me ask you specifically, you're talking about integrations with other cloud type solutions, right? Not just legacy software, right? Because it's one thing to try and be integrated into SAP, but what you're going to find is most SAP installations are still enterprise non-cloud based. Therefore, every time there's not one ring to rule them all, right? Those are all individual integrations, which is also, I'm in the weeds here a little bit, but this is where I think people get a little bit confused. It's like, oh, you integrate with SAP. It's like, okay, let's be clear about this. I can integrate with the cloud version, the HANA, the SAP that's hosted, and kind of one size fits all. But I can't do it for all these discrete enterprise Frankensteins that live out there, that we all know live out there, because those are all become custom integrations, right? And this is another thing that's right here and now, right, is I think you can integrate with other cloud solutions, but enterprises are still not completely all on cloud-based solutions. So that creates some challenges.
It's true. It's true. But I
Yeah.
think I try to intentionally try to blur the lines because we're willing to take on, it's very common for us to work with a company who has cloud-hosted versions of X, Y, and Z, but then to get to the real meat of the platform, we need to get into their custom internal system. It's not unusual at all for us to have. So a lot of our clients are. We have a really strong market share among the on-demand delivery companies, pretty much 100%. And when you think about their internal systems, our ability, we're not going to be pushing our platform on a client like that. What we do is we create connection points, connective tissue, so that when our workforce is working on a client's proprietary system, it's hosted in our platform, on our tools. We're tracking the activities that are taking place there. And it's in the context of a larger process that's managed on platform. But yeah, I think like there are some complexities, but at the same time, it's quite often the case that the beginning of the line or the end of the line for a process that we've modeled in executing it, like the end of the line may be, here's some data we're pushing into your Salesforce, or the start of the process is we have a trigger step that's fired because we see that there's been some change to some call to some proprietary API, or maybe it's as simple as we call Jira and we see a list of tasks that they've pushed into their Jira system for us to fetch. It's extremely diverse, but it turns out that if you cover 50-ish, 50 to 100 platforms, and you've got 5-6 years of experience doing that, it turns out you can do quite a lot of things with those Lego blocks. You can build the Death Star and you can build the Eiffel Tower.
Right, 100%. Scott, I want to I look at these things and I say this in almost every episode that I do. An hour goes by before you even know it, even though this is our first real conversation, it could spend a lot of time with you here because you just had me thinking about, I just was in a dialogue with Peter Evans the other day, who does all the platform books, Platform Revolution, and then he and Jeff Parker lead a bunch of stuff in the platform space. And I think there's an entire number of episodes, a panel where we could talk about what does it mean to be a platform of platforms? What is the enterprise platform strategy going into the next 6, 7, 8 years? And even though, for us, it's almost like breathing, it's still somewhat new right now, right? And sometimes even as technologists, you got to remind yourself that you've been thinking about these things for probably 10 years before anyone else has even realized there's a problem. And so you got to kind of slow yourself down a little bit. But regardless, just a couple things here to kind of wind down a little bit, Scott. So what's going on? Where are people going to find you? What's new, with coming up, just with Invisible or yourself, or kind of we're coming out of this whole, business back to usual kind of stuff. But what's going on for you guys? How do they find you? And just some parting thoughts.
Wow, it's hard not to open up new doors.
Yeah, right. I that's why I was slowing myself down. I was like, oh God, I got to constrain myself.
What I will say is that we are. I'll just briefly say we've done a few. I'm going to leave a few teasers. One, we did the thing that you're maybe not supposed to do, which is rebuild your entire platform. After a few years of experience and looking at kind of the problem space, we have this year rebuilt our entire platform and moved most of our customer base. By the end of the year, everyone will be over onto the new platform. Hugely risky move from my perspective, to be candid. Like as a technology leader, you never feel more exposed than when you're like, I can't look at today's problems fully because I'm building the next generation platform. So this goes into maintenance mode. And I'm just really excited that we've launched the new platform and that we have all our clients moving over. If they're not over, they're in a migration path right now. And it just opens up the possibilities at a massive level. It's like moving into a brand new house. Yeah. And that's what's really exciting for us right now is that we've got we've gotten out of the woods. We've gotten past the huge risky part of the transition, and that's just a fantastic feeling.
That's awesome.
when we go into next year, we go into 2023, we're starting fresh. And I think like in any startup, every week you're a new company.
Yeah.
We're a company that's growing really rapidly. We are profitable. We are self-owned, and we are living in a brand new, beautiful house.
And masters of your own destiny with all
masters of our own destiny with our own. Right. We're at the.
That's awesome.
Our own ship. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Scott, listen, really, just a wonderful treat today. Really, we'll follow up with you some more. But thank you so much for spending some time with us today. It was a really great conversation.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it. Hopefully we talk again soon.
Thanks for listening. If you have any comments about this episode or topics on supply chain you'd like us to cover, you can reach us at supplychainnext@requis.com. And while you're at it, check out the Requis platform at supplychain.requis.com. Requis allows you to manage the full asset lifecycle in the cloud while collaborating with your entire value network to buy, manage, and sell your assets. Find out more at requis.com.